book where you left off in your reading for your homework over the weekend. So we're at the very top of that page. Do you have any evidence for that? Follow along with me as I read. Christians are used to counterpunching alternative theories to the resurrection. In fact, we've just done that by pointing out the numerous deficiencies in the alternate theories ourselves. But that's not enough. While skeptics rightfully put the burden of proof for the resurrection on Christians, and as we have seen, Christians can meet that burden with good evidence, Christians need to put the burden of proof on skeptics for their alternative theories. In light of all the positive evidence for the resurrection, skeptics must offer positive first century evidence for their alternative views. In other words, where's the first century evidence of Jesus having a twin, for instance? It's one thing to concoct, to create an alternative theory to the resurrection, but it's another thing to actually find first century evidence for it. A theory is not evidence. Reasonable people demand evidence, not just theories. Anyone can concoct a theory to explain any historical event. For example, if someone were to claim that all the video footage from the Holocaust concentration camps was staged and manufactured by Jews in order to garner sympathy and support for a Jewish state, would you believe that theory? Of course not, because it flies in the face of all the known evidence. To be taken seriously, those who offer such a theory must present credible, independent eyewitness reports and other corroborating evidence to counter the numerous reports that say the Holocaust was real and was actually carried out by the Nazis. But no such counter evidence exists. This is the case with the resurrection. While skeptics have formulated numerous alternative theories to explain away the resurrection, there is no evidence from any first century source supporting any of them. The only alternative theory that's even mentioned is the first century source the disciples stole the body, is from Matthew, and it is clearly identified as a lie. No one from the ancient world, not even the enemies of Christianity, has offered a plausible, a believable alternative explanation for the resurrection. Many alternative theories formulated over the past 200 years are rooted in anti-supernaturalism. Since modern scholars philosophically rule out miracles in advance, they concoct ad hoc, out of thin air, explanations, or after the fact, explanations to explain away the resurrection. As we have seen, their ad hoc explanations contain multiple absurdities or improbabilities. Those who have alternative theories to the resurrection, should be asked, what evidence do you have for your theory? Can you please name 3 or 4 first century sources that support your theory? When honest skeptics are presented with this question, they typically answer with silence or a stuttering admission that they have no such evidence because none exists. And it's not just the resurrection that the skeptics have to explain. They also have to explain the other 35 miracles that eyewitnesses have associated with Jesus. Are we to believe that the 4 gospel writers were all deceived about all of those miracles as well as the resurrection? This mass deception theory needs evidence. Do we have any other first century sources that offer a different explanation for the works of Jesus? The only one discovered, and it's probably from the 2nd century, is the Jewish Talmud, which admits that the Jewish Talmud, by the way, is like commentary on Scripture, on the Old Testament Scripture, which admits that Jesus performed unusual acts by saying that he practiced sorcery. But this explanation is just as weak as the Jewish explanation for the resurrection. The disciples stole the body. Perhaps sorcery could explain some of Jesus' miracles, but all 35? Sorcerers and magicians cannot perform the kinds of acts that Jesus is said to have performed, raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, walking on water, and so forth. So if there's no ancient evidence for deception, are we to take the New Testament miracles at face value? Why not? We live in a theistic universe where miracles are possible. And while it's true that we don't have independent attestation for all of the miracles in the New Testament, because some were mentioned by only one writer. We certainly have multiple attestation for many of them, including the resurrection. The sheer number of Jesus' miracles cited by independent sources is too great to be explained away as a great deception. One person may be deceived once, but not numerous observers repeatedly. German scholar Wolfgang Trilling writes, "We are convinced and hold it for historically certain that Jesus did in fact perform miracles. The miracle reports occupy so much space in the Gospels that it is impossible that all could have been subsequently invented or transferred to Jesus." William Lane Craig concludes, "The fact that miracle working belongs to the historical Jesus is no longer disputed. That is, miracles are not disputed on historical grounds, only on philosophical grounds. More on this in a minute. The bottom line is that there are too many miracles and too much testimony to believe that all of the eyewitnesses got it wrong every time. With regard to the resurrection, all alternative theories have fatal flaws, and we have strong eyewitness and circumstantial evidence that Jesus actually rose from the dead. In other words, not only do we lack a natural explanation for the empty tomb, we have positive evidence for the resurrection. The explanation that requires the least amount of faith is that Jesus really did perform miracles and really did rise from the dead as he predicted. So we don't have enough faith to believe that the New Testament writers were all deceived. We're going to go a little further. Why don't all scholars believe? If we have an accurate copy of early testimony, chapter 9, if the testimony is not only early but from eyewitnesses, chapter 10, if those eyewitnesses recorded what they saw accurately, chapter 11, and if the eyewitnesses were not deceived about what they reported, this chapter, then why don't all scholars take the New Testament at face value? For the same reason, Darwinists refuse to acknowledge the evidence that defeats their view. They have a philosophical bias against miracles. This bias was admitted during a debate between William Lane Craig and Krasov. I can't remember his first name. Craig believes, as we do, that the evidence for the historicity of the literal resurrection is strong. Crossan, on the other hand, does not believe that Jesus literally rose from the dead. Here is a very telling exchange between the two men. Okay. Would there be anything, Dr. Crossan, that could convince you that Jesus was risen from the dead as a historical fact? I need to make certain of what we're talking about. Let's say we have a situation outside the empty tomb on Easter Sunday morning. If somebody had a video cam, would we have recorded something coming out of the tomb? Is that the type of question? I guess what I'm asking, and what I think Mr. Buckley, who is the moderator, is pushing for is this. What evidence would it take to convince you? Or are your preconceived ideas about the impossibility of the miraculous and so forth so strong that, in fact, they skew your historical judgments so that such an event could never even be admitted into court? Crossan, no. A doctor at Lourdes might admit, I have absolutely no medical way of explaining what has happened. This is a right statement. Then one has the right to say, I by faith therefore believe that God has intervened here. But it's a theological presupposition of mine that God does not operate that way. So he presupposes it. He preloads it into his thought process. What would it take to prove to me what you ask? I don't know, unless God changes the universe. I could imagine discovering tomorrow morning that every tree outside my house had moved 5 feet. That needs some explanation. I don't know the explanation, but I won't immediately presume a miracle. Crossan's explicit statement of his theological presupposition against miracles is a candid admission on his part. Of course, Crossan doesn't speak for all skeptical scholars, but certainly a majority of them deny the plain reading of the New Testament because they share his philosophical bias against miracles. It is not the historical evidence for the New Testament is weak. It is not that the historical evidence for the New Testament is weak. It's very strong indeed. It's that they've ruled out miracles in advance. They arrive at the wrong conclusion because their bias makes it impossible for them to arrive at the right conclusion. Now, if you would please open your little atheist books. We are on page 79. You should have answered the first 9 of the quick questions, so we're going to discuss. What?
Page 84.
Is it chapter 12? I'm sorry, chapter 11. Thank you. Page 85, number 10. Despite the attempts made by skeptics to use their alternative theories to refute Jesus' death and resurrection, what are some strategic ways you can put the burden of proof back on them? Grace.
Ask what evidence they have.
Right, and what first century evidence, right? So can they prove their theory with first century evidence of whatever their theory is, whether that's a twin or stealing the body or hallucination, doesn't matter. Just what is your first century evidence? What else? You could ask, can you offer a plausible alternative? Do you have evidence for any alternative? Okay, we're going to move on to the engage questions on pages 86 and 87. Look at number 1. Review the debate between Craig and Crossan on pages 315 and 316. What was Dr. Craig's strategy in the debate, and what did it reveal about Dr. Crossan as a result? So let's start with that first one. What was Dr. Craig's strategy? Yeah, asking questions. Listen, asking questions is a great way to engage someone who is either an unbeliever or a skeptic. Because as long as you don't have an attitude about it, as long as you're not sarcastic about it, it gets them talking. And as they talk, sometimes they even hear the inconsistencies, or they realize, I can't answer those questions. Maybe I need to figure out what the answers are. Asking questions is a great way to engage someone in a conversation, in any sort of spiritual conversation. I don't know too many unbelievers, skeptics, who want to be preached at. Asking questions is a great thing to do. So yeah, the strategy was to ask questions that would lead to an admission of bias from Crossan. And then what did it reveal about Dr. Crossan as a result? Yeah. Right, that there are no miracles, and that God doesn't work that way. That was preloaded. That's what a presupposition is. That was preloaded into his theological hard drive. I don't know, his understanding. So ultimately, he admitted that no matter the event or no matter the fruit, he would refuse to believe because God doesn't work that way. He rules them out in advance. One thing I want to point out to you is that William Lane Craig did not berate Crossan. He wasn't disrespectful to Crossan. He simply asked questions. which is, what we're told in Scripture, to always be ready to give an answer to those, who question you about the truth, but do so with gentleness and respect. We need to. Okay, we're going to fill in these blanks on number 2. So, how would you go about discussing miracles in their proper context with a skeptic? And this is on. Well, I guess we can't do this. We're just going to do one. We can't do this one. Never mind. We haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so here's what I need you to do. I need to make room for it, though. And I have a study guide for you for this chapter. I need you to open your books to chapter 12, number 3, and leave them upside down on this table here. You will get them back tomorrow, and I'm going to hand out a study guide to you, your quiz. I'm going to check to make sure I think it's Friday.
This is Gager.
Yes.
You mean our little?
Your little atheist books upside down. Crazy. Open to the correct page.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. If you have your questions from the movie complete, and get studying for your test.
How did you do that? Oh.
I have all these from the movie,
Yes.
the video.
I just gave it to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.